March 19th, 1945, the morning fog hadn't lifted yet when Major Earl Skip Thompson walked onto the grassy airfield in Belgium, rubbing sleep out of his eyes and gripping a half-smoked cigarette. He wasn't supposed to be flying combat missions. His job was recon. Fly low, observe German movements, report back. That was it. But Skip wasn't the type to just watch from above while others died on the ground. The war was in its final, brutal months, and the Germans were throwing everything they had into desperate counterattacks. Panzers, those thick-skinned steel monsters, were pushing through small villages and tearing Allied lines apart. The infantry boys had little to fight back with. Anti-tank support was always late or worse, gone. Skip had seen it happen too many times. That's when the idea came to him, half insane, half genius. What if his little Piper Cub, light, slow, unarmored, could do more than just spot targets? What if it could kill them? He had seen discarded bazookas lying around from infantry units, some half-damaged, others just forgotten. The first time he brought it up to the mechanics, they thought he was joking. "You want to strap bazookas to a recon plane?" One of them laughed, wiping grease from his hands. Skip didn't laugh. He just pointed to the field hospital across the airstrip. That's full of kids who had no backup. If I can hit even one tank, it's worth it. It took a week of arguing, bribing, and some creative paperwork. But eventually he got what he wanted. 4 bazookas, 2 strapped under each wing of his L4 Grasshopper. No targeting system, no switches, just wires rigged to a simple trigger mechanism he could pull from inside the cockpit. If it worked, it would be a miracle. If it didn't, it would probably kill him. The higher-ups never approved it officially. In fact, they never even knew, at least not at first. Skip figured it was easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission. He flew low, kept his mouth shut, and waited. And then the call came in. A Panzer unit had broken through near the village of Weiler. Infantry units were pinned down in the valley. No support available for at least 3 hours. Skip's fingers twitched. He looked at the bazookas under his wings, then at the fuel gauge. He didn't hesitate. He was in the air in 10 minutes. Flying a Cub at low altitude over enemy tanks was like playing tag with a hornet's nest using a paper kite. The plane had no armor, no speed, and made a sound like an old lawnmower. But Skip had one advantage. He was fearless, and he knew the land better than most. He flew low, just above the tree line, dodging flak and rifle fire. The village came into view, and so did the tanks. 6 Panzers lined the road, shells thundering into Allied positions. Skip dove. At barely 100 feet, he yanked the trigger. The first bazooka flared to life, launching its rocket toward the nearest tank. A puff of smoke, then a loud crack as the rocket hit the Panzer's rear armor. It didn't explode, but the tank stopped moving. Smoke hissed from its engine. He circled again, this time lower. 2 more rockets fired. One missed. The other slammed into a second tank, catching it from the side. Flames erupted from its hatch. The Germans weren't prepared for an attack from the air by such a small plane. Most didn't even look up. Those who did probably thought it was a joke, until the 4th rocket slammed directly into the top of a 3rd Panzer. That one exploded like a firecracker stuffed with fuel. Skip pulled up, heart pounding, the plane shaking from wind and recoil. He'd used all his rockets, but it wasn't over. He flew back toward base, reloaded with help from his ground crew, who were now wide-eyed believers, and went up again. By sundown, 6 Panzers had been knocked out. Infantrymen later said it looked like a miracle from the sky. No one could believe a light Cub aircraft had done that kind of damage. When the report reached headquarters, there was panic at first. A major had modified U.S. Army equipment without approval. He could have been court-martialed. But then came the letters from the infantrymen he saved. Then the photos. Then the confirmation that yes, one rogue pilot, flying a paper-thin recon plane armed with bazookas, had wrecked 6 German tanks in one day. Skip never saw himself as a hero. He said he just got tired of watching good men die while he circled overhead with a clipboard. After that day, other pilots began copying the mod, quietly, unofficially. But they did. And the enemy? They started looking up. The day after the attack, Major Skip Thompson walked into the mess tent like nothing had happened. mud on his boots, grease on his sleeves, and a coffee in his hand. The young mechanics looked at him like he was a ghost. Not a war hero, a ghost! Because by all rights, he shouldn't have come back from that flight. 6 tanks, sir? One of them whispered, like even saying it out loud might jinx something. Skip didn't answer. He just gave a nod and kept walking. He wasn't looking for praise. In truth, his hands were still shaking from the flight. Not from fear, but from the noise. The sudden violence of those bazookas firing inches from his head, the black smoke, the stench of burning fuel. He had never been that close to death and come back smiling. But he wasn't done. That night, a courier arrived from Battalion HQ with strict orders. Skip was to report immediately. They knew. Someone had seen the wreckage, maybe even caught a glimpse of his cub circling like a vulture over the battlefield. There were whispers of a court-martial, unauthorized modifications, risking government property, disobeying air command. He packed his bag. As he stood outside his tent ready to leave, a young corporal ran up and shoved a folded piece of paper into his hand. "It's from the boys at the 3 and 12th. They told me to give you this if you were getting hauled in." Skip unfolded it. It was just one line scrawled in pencil. "Tell 'em we'd all be dead if that cub hadn't come." He tucked it into his jacket and climbed into the jeep without a word. The drive was long and cold. At Battalion HQ, he was met not with handcuffs, but with silence. Men looked at him like they weren't sure whether to salute or arrest him. In the briefing room, a full-bird colonel sat behind a desk, flipping through a file like it was a breakfast menu. "You strapped bazookas under a reconnaissance plane," the colonel said flatly. "Flew into enemy fire without orders. Took out 6 tanks. Then did it again." Skip didn't speak. He figured arguing would just dig the hole deeper. "You realize how insane that sounds, Major?" "Yes, sir. You realize you could be grounded. Or worse?" "I do." The colonel closed the file. He looked at Skip for a long time, like he was trying to decide whether this man was dangerous or just stupid lucky. Then he leaned back in his chair and said something Skip didn't expect. "Damn good flying." Skip blinked. "Sir, you're not the first lunatic pilot I've met, but you might be the first one who actually made a difference." There was a pause. The colonel tapped a pencil against the desk. "I'm not officially approving this. Modification, but I'm not shutting it down either. Keep it quiet. No paperwork, no bragging. If you die up there, we'll deny everything. Understood?" Skip nodded once. And just like that, the war changed a little. Within a week, 3 more pilots from neighboring recon squadrons showed up at Skip's hangar asking for the Thompson setup. The mechanics, once skeptical, had now become eager co-conspirators, customizing racks, adjusting rocket angles, testing trigger lines with the precision of watchmakers. It wasn't just about killing tanks anymore. It was about sending a message that even the weakest-looking plane could become a threat if flown by someone crazy enough to try. The Germans began to take notice. Reports came in of enemy armor diverting routes when cubs were spotted overhead. At first, they thought the Allies had invented a new air weapon. They didn't realize it was just some field-rigged bazookas and a pilot with guts. One night, Skip sat alone by the edge of the airfield, listening to distant gunfire and thinking about how strange it all was. A little plane, built for taking photos, now carried the weight of something far heavier: death, hope, revenge. He lit another cigarette and watched the stars. He wasn't a hero, not in his eyes. Just a man who got tired of watching the world fall apart from the safety of altitude. But deep down, he knew something had changed. He'd flown over those Panzers and struck back, not because someone told him to, because someone had to. And next time, he'd be ready again. 2 days later, before the sun had even warmed the frost off the grass, Skip was back in the air. The cub rattled under his grip like a machine held together with little more than luck and resolve. But it flew, damn, it still flew. His new nickname, whispered across tents and trenches, was the tank sniper. The brass never used it, but the infantry boys sure did. They'd look up at that buzzing little plane and grin like they'd just seen a guardian angel with teeth. The enemy had no idea what to do about him. That suited Skip just fine. This morning, though, things were different. As he climbed toward a small village northeast of Aachen, the air was too quiet. No bursts of flak, no scattered gunfire, not even smoke on the horizon. But the radio chatter told a different story. "Thunder 2, this is Red Fox," the voice crackled. "Multiple Panzers spotted near the river bend. Infantry pinned near Hill 42. Can you confirm?" Skip tapped the mic. "Roger that, Red Fox. I'm en route." Hill 42 was bad terrain. Open fields, few trees, nowhere to hide. He knew it too well. He'd flown over it a dozen times. If the Germans had tanks dug in there, his boys below were sitting ducks. As he approached, he saw them. 3 German Panthers and 2 half-tracks parked like wolves waiting to pounce. Worse, they'd parked near a small farmhouse, likely hoping the structure would hide their heat signatures from Allied scouts. Smart, but not smart enough. Skip dipped the wing, gave a tight turn to the left, and got eyes on the situation. His heart beat faster, not from fear but from calculation. He only had 4 rockets. He'd have to make every one count. The cub's canvas skin flapped as he descended. Just above treetop level, he began his run. The farmhouse loomed up ahead, partially hiding one of the Panthers. He waited, then pulled the trigger. Thwack! The rocket screamed downward, arcing through the early morning mist. Direct hit. Smoke erupted from the Panther's engine deck as flames licked up the rear armor. Skip didn't wait for the explosion. He was already pulling away, adjusting course for the second pass. By now the Germans were scrambling. A mounted machine gun opened up, but the bullets sprayed wildly, the gunners not used to aiming at such a slow and small aircraft. Skip swung back hard, his stomach lurching from the G-force. He lined up the second rocket and fired. This one clipped the half-track side. It didn't explode, but it spun the vehicle half around and sent the soldiers inside diving for cover. He could hear the shouts below, even over the roar of his engine. American troops were moving now. He saw them, tiny figures sprinting from cover as the enemy fell into chaos. Past 3, another rocket. This time he aimed for the second Panther. The shot was good, too good. The rocket struck the turret seam and triggered a violent blast, ammunition cooking off, a fireball punching into the sky. The Cub shook from the shockwave, metal creaking, bolts whining like they were begging him to land. He had 1 rocket left. As he circled for a final run, something caught his eye. A flash of sunlight reflecting off something hidden near the tree line. A 6th vehicle. Another Panther. But this one was different, camouflage, still watching. It was bait, and Skip had taken it too late. As he made his last pass, the hidden tank opened fire. He didn't even hear the shot, just felt the sudden lift of air from beneath his left wing. The Cub jolted. A hole tore through the wing's canvas, and smoke hissed from the fuel line. The plane tipped sideways for a second too long. Skip gritted his teeth, yanked hard on the stick, and leveled her out. He was losing fuel fast, but he had 1 shot left. He didn't even think, just turned the nose toward the hidden tank and let it fly. The rocket screamed down and vanished into the trees. A pause, then a soft bloom of black smoke. Not fire, not an explosion, but enough damage to make that tank back off. He barely made it back to the field, skidding onto the grass with the engine choking, the prop spinning slower with every second. Mechanics ran to meet him, mouths open at the state of the aircraft. Holes in the wings, black streaks across the fuselage, 1 landing gear bent. He climbed out and dropped to the ground, chest heaving. "Sir, you're—" A private started. "Don't say it," Skip said, waving him off. Instead, he looked out toward the horizon, toward Hill 42. The smoke rising there wasn't his. It was theirs. He had done what recon pilots weren't meant to do, again. And next time, he knew the enemy would be waiting. But so would he. 2 nights later, they came for him. It wasn't the MPs, and it wasn't the brass. It was 2 men in black coats, arriving in a muddy jeep with no markings and a clipboard that didn't list their names. They weren't interested in his kill count, or even the damage to his aircraft. They just had one question. How the hell did you hit a camouflaged Panther from a Cub? Skip sat on a wooden crate outside the maintenance tent, sipping cold coffee while a mechanic patched bullet holes with canvas and tape. "Luck," he said flatly. The taller of the two men didn't smile. "There's no such thing. Not out there. We've got intel that says German armor is adapting. Camouflage nets. Hidden nests. They're learning. We need to know what you're doing that others aren't." Skip stared at the man for a moment, then nodded at the cub behind him. "You see that bird? She's light. No armor, no tech, no radio spotter. But she floats low enough to smell the mud. That's the trick. I don't hunt like the big boys, I listen. I feel for what doesn't belong." The shorter agent scribbled something in a notebook. The taller one remained silent, eyeing Skip like he was some strange new weapon they didn't understand yet. "We want to fit your cub with a new prototype," he finally said. "Something experimental. Infrared spotting lens. Early version. Top secret. Might help you find those hidden tanks faster." "It's untested." Skip raised an eyebrow. "So was strapping bazookas to the wings." The agent handed him a folder. "You'll fly with it starting tomorrow. You're not grounded. Quite the opposite. Command's interested in turning this into something bigger, if you survive." And just like that, Skip Thompson became part of something bigger than himself, something buried deeper than the war headlines or morning briefings. A quiet experiment? A field test wrapped in silence. By the next day, the cub was different. Same wings, same patched-up skin, but now there was a bulky lens fitted to the underside, wired crudely to a small viewing box inside the cockpit. It looked like it had been stolen off a submarine. Skip didn't care how it looked. If it helped save lives, he'd fly it blindfolded. At 500 hours, he was airborne again, mist clinging to the earth like wet cloth. The mission was simple on paper. Patrol a 10-mile stretch near a small town called Eisendorf. The problem was the town hadn't heard gunfire in a week, and that made everyone nervous. Too quiet meant a trap. As he floated over the edge of town, he looked through the new lens. At first, it was just shadows, blurred shapes, heat marks bleeding across his vision. Then something caught his eye, a faint glow in the tree line shaped like an engine not moving. Then another, side by side. Too perfect. Too still. Tanks, but not parked, hidden. That's when he saw it. The shimmer of heat inside the farmhouse, troops, waiting, a trap. An ambush for the next convoy that rolled through. Skip had a choice. He could fly back, report it, and wait for someone with heavier guns. But by then, that convoy would be ashes. He banked hard left, lined up his first pass, and fired. The rocket slammed into the farmhouse roof, blowing it open like a box of matches. Soldiers scattered, some on fire, others running into the trees. He saw one raise a rifle and fire upward. A bullet sliced past the windshield, cracking the glass like a spiderweb. He didn't flinch. He circled and dropped two more rockets. One struck a tank's rear end, disabling it, while the other clipped the corner of a bunker they hadn't even spotted on the maps. That left one rocket. The last tank was turning now, slow and angry, its turret rotating toward the sound of his engine. It fired. The ground behind Skip exploded into dirt and flame. Shrapnel pinged against the cub's tail, ripping through fabric and control lines. He had seconds. He dipped low, dangerously low, and fired. The final rocket slammed into the side of the tank just as it began to move. The blast flipped the turret sideways, and a small burst of flame shot through the hatch. Smoke rose. The field was clear. Skip limped back to base with a half-working rudder and smoke trailing from his engine. When he landed, the mechanics rushed forward, but he waved them off. He climbed out, dragging his gear, and looked at the men waiting near the runway. Same black coats, same clipboard. The taller one stepped forward. "Looks like the lens worked." Skip shook his head. "No, the lens helped. But it wasn't the lens that pulled that trigger." The agent didn't reply. He didn't have to. Because they both knew. This wasn't just a story about a cub and some bazookas anymore. This was war, rewritten in real time by the man crazy enough to try. By the following week, Skip Thompson wasn't just a pilot anymore. He was a rumor. A whisper passed around foxholes and fire pits. The crazy bastard with the cub, the tank killer in the sky. Some said he was flying a secret new fighter. Others swore he was already dead, and what they saw was his ghost getting revenge one last time. Skip ignored it all. He still walked with mud on his boots and grease on his fingers, same as before. But inside, something had shifted. He wasn't just flying missions anymore. He was being watched, measured, studied. The men in black coats had returned, this time with more equipment and a photographer who barely said a word. They mounted a strange-looking camera to his cub's wing and told him to keep doing what you're doing. That was it. No mission briefing, no orders, just fly, fight, survive. He didn't ask why. He didn't care. The war didn't wait for answers. The next mission came fast. Reports of German armor spotted moving through the Siegen woods, dense, hilly terrain. The Allies had been trying to clear for weeks. The trees were too thick for bombers, and the tanks were using the forest to slip between lines. Infantry couldn't track them fast enough. Artillery couldn't see them, but Skip could. He was in the air before dawn. The cold wind stung his cheeks as he flew low across the treetops. The cub wasn't meant for this kind of flying. The trees loomed like wooden spears. One mistake, one gust of wind, and the whole thing would splinter into fire and cloth. He scanned the forest through the infrared lens. Most of it looked like a pulsing grey blur, cold trees, frozen ground, but then between the hills, a faint glow. Not just one, 4, moving. Skip followed them, heart-pounding, fingers light on the stick. The German column was slipping through a shallow valley. 2 tanks in front, 2 behind, with a personnel carrier in the middle. A perfect line, but he was alone. He had 4 rockets. 5 targets, he dove. The first rocket ripped into the lead tank, hitting the tread and flipping it sideways into a ditch. Smoke shot upward, curling between the trees. The others halted in confusion. The second rocket flew straight into the carrier. It exploded with such force that the cub jolted backward in mid-air, the tail fishtailing like it had been slapped. Bits of metal and body parts scattered into the trees. Skip pulled up sharply, his vision going dark at the edges. He circled around lower this time, almost kissing the treetops. Machine gun fire erupted from below, wild and erratic, flashes of light in the forest. A bullet tore through the wing. Another clipped the tail. A third snapped clean through the cockpit canopy, grazing his shoulder. The pain was sharp and sudden, like fire licking through muscle. Blood soaked into his jacket, warm and fast. But his hands didn't leave the stick. He lined up his third shot and fired. It struck the second tank head-on. A delayed explosion. Then the turret blew clean off, cartwheeling into the trees like a coin flipped by God. He didn't wait. He turned for the last. His vision was blurring now. The pain in his shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. Smoke was leaking into the cockpit, and the cub was rattling like a dying animal. The last tank had started moving, trying to reverse out of the ambush. Skip gritted his teeth and dove again. The final rocket hit the engine block. Not a direct kill, but enough. The tank shuddered, then stalled, black smoke hissing from its vents. He had done it. 5 vehicles, alone, wounded. As he turned the cub toward home, he could see the trees parting below, American infantry moving in, taking the ground. He'd cracked open the line, and they were pouring through like water. Back at base, he crash-landed. He didn't have a choice. The engine sputtered twice and died mid-glide, and he skidded into the mud with one wing half torn and fuel leaking in every direction. He tumbled out of the cockpit, coughing, bloody, exhausted. The photographer was there before the medics. Click, flash, another click. Skip didn't speak. He just lay there, staring at the sky, feeling the wet earth against his back, thinking that maybe this time, just maybe, he'd gone too far. But as the blackcoats leaned over him, nodding, taking notes, one of them whispered something low. They're calling it the Thompson Doctrine now. Skip laughed once, just a dry breath, and passed out cold. The field hospital smelled like iodine and gun oil. Skip woke up 2 days later, shoulder-stitched, ribs bandaged, and one eye swollen shut. His first thought wasn't the pain. It was the sound, silence. No engines, no gunfire, no orders barked over radios. Just the low murmur of nurses and the distant hum of generators. He hated it. Lying still felt worse than flying into flak. The war didn't pause just because he'd sprung a few leaks. Somewhere out there, more tanks were crawling through trees. More infantry boys were pinned down, and his cub, his bird, was probably grounded. Sitting alone under a tarp like a broken tool nobody needed anymore. But not for long. By the third day, he was on his feet, limping through the tents, ignoring the doctor's protests. He found the blackcoats waiting by the mess hall, sipping coffee like they owned the place. They didn't even look surprised to see him walking. "I need my plane back," he said, voice hoarse. "You're not cleared to fly," one of them replied calmly. Skip leaned in, eyes tired but sharp. "I wasn't cleared to strap bazookas to a cub either." "That didn't stop me." They exchanged a look. The taller one, now wearing captain's bars that Skip knew damn well weren't his originally, pulled a folder from his coat. "There's something bigger coming," he said. "High Command's moving toward the Ruhr. We've got intel that the Germans are planning one last major push. Tiger tanks, anti-air emplacements, mobile artillery. They're digging in deep." Skip didn't blink. "And you want me to scout it?" The man shook his head. "Not just scout. We want you to punch through it. One last run, behind enemy lines. Disrupt the convoy before it reaches the front. You'll have backup this time. 3 other pilots we've trained with your setup. But you lead." Skip didn't hesitate. "When?" "Tomorrow." He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the runway, watching the fog roll in over the hangars, cradling a flask of whiskey and thinking about all the men who wouldn't see tomorrow. The ones who'd bled out under tanks. The ones who'd cried for artillery support that never came. He thought about that first flight, about how insane it all seemed, strapping anti-tank rockets to a recon bird. And now, here they were, turning it into doctrine. At dawn, the cub rolled out, its patched wings bearing fresh paint, dull olive green with a small white skull stenciled on the nose. Not regulation, but fitting. 3 other cubs sat beside it, each armed like his, rockets rigged, propellers spinning nervously, their pilots gripping controls like boys handed rifles for the first time. He didn't know their names, didn't need to. They weren't there to follow orders. They were there to follow madness. Skip climbed into his seat. The mechanics saluted, and he gave them a tired nod. Then the headset crackled. "Thunder 1, this is Outpost. Convoy confirmed. 17 miles northeast of Essen, grid square K14. They're moving fast." "You don't have much time," he didn't respond. "Just push the throttle forward." The 4 cubs lifted into the air like a swarm of hornets armed with sticks and fire. Light, fragile, deadly. They flew low, weaving between tree lines, the sun rising like a blood-orange eye behind the smoke-choked sky. Below them, trucks rolled across frozen dirt roads. Covered wagons, tank destroyers, fuel carriers, a convoy built to tear through Allied lines. Skip didn't wait. He signaled with a flick of the wing and dove. His first rocket slammed into the lead truck, turning it into a fireball that blocked the road. The convoy stalled, and then hell rained down. The second cub hit a Tiger tank square in the engine block. The third took out a fuel truck, the explosion lighting up the forest like sunrise. Gunfire erupted, rifles, machine guns, even an AA cannon that spat shells into the air like angry wasps. Skip flew right through it. His cub shook violently, bullet holes blooming along the wings, the fuselage cracking, but he didn't let go. He fired again. Another tank crippled, another turret silenced. Around him, his team danced through the flak like men who didn't care if they lived or died. Maybe they didn't. He heard screaming over the radio. One of the other cubs had gone down, clipped by AA fire and crashing into the treetops. He didn't look. He couldn't. They finished the run and broke off, engines coughing, rocket racks empty, smoke trailing behind like wounded birds heading home. But the damage was done. The convoy was wrecked, burning, twisted metal strewn across the road, German soldiers scattering into the woods, the push toward the Ruhr crippled before it even began. Back at base, Skip landed last. The cub touched down hard, tires bald, fuel near empty. He climbed out, coughing smoke, bleeding through his bandages, and said only one thing: "Tell command the doctrine works." And then he collapsed. When Skip woke up this time, it wasn't in a tent or a muddy cot beside dying men. It was in a real hospital, deep behind Allied lines. Clean sheets, white walls, the hum of electricity instead of the thud of artillery. Outside the window, spring had started to bloom. Birds chirped. Daffodils nodded in the wind. It felt wrong. His chest ached. His shoulder burned. But nothing hurt more than the quiet. The war was still going, he knew that, but here it was distant, muffled, like he'd been pulled out of a nightmare and dropped into a world that had no idea what he'd just done. A nurse came in, smiled too politely and said, "Good morning, Major Thompson." He hated that. He was just Skip, always had been. "You've got visitors," she added. He groaned. "If it's the guys in black coats again, tell them I'm dead." But it wasn't the agents this time. It was a general, old, stern, with ribbons and pins that probably weighed more than his pistol. Behind him stood 2 aides and a young officer who looked like he'd never fired a weapon in his life. "Major Thompson," the general said, stepping to the foot of the bed. "You've caused quite a stir." "Just trying not to get shot, sir," Skip muttered, wincing as he sat up. The general didn't smile. "You crippled a mechanized convoy with 4 scout planes, saved hundreds of Allied lives, delayed the enemy's advance by nearly 2 days. You also destroyed equipment we technically weren't supposed to have airborne." Skip smirked. "Guess that makes it a draw." The general looked at him hard for a moment, then pulled a folder from his coat. "The War Department is considering turning your tactics into an official air-ground support doctrine. Not just recon, not just fire support. A whole new class of combat pilot. Fast, low, surgical. We're calling it aerial disruption reconnaissance." Skip blinked. "You're naming it?" "After you," the general added, dead serious. "The Thompson Doctrine. It's being drafted right now. They want to send you stateside for press, medals, promotion." Skip's stomach twisted. Press? Medals? Suits in Washington talking about innovation while kids bled in forests. He shook his head. "I'm not interested in parades, or handshakes, or standing behind microphones." "You've done enough," the general said quietly. Skip met his eyes. "Not yet." There was a long pause. Then the general closed the folder. "Then you'll have your aircraft ready in 3 days. But this is your last mission, Thompson. After this, you go home." "That's not a request." Skip didn't answer. But in his gut, he knew it too. The cub was barely holding together, his body even less so. He'd cheated death too many times, and the ledger was catching up. 3 days later, he was back on the field, wrapped in bandages, painkillers numbing the worst of it. The cub was there too, patched, rearmed, and waiting like a warhorse that refused to die. The other pilots saluted him like he was some legend now. He didn't like that either. The mission was short but critical. Intel showed a final German holdout, one last supply line feeding fuel and shells to the front. A small armored train tucked deep into a mountain pass, unreachable by bombers, untouchable by ground forces. A ghost route, keeping the war alive just a little longer. Skip's job was to find it and destroy it. He flew low, as always, hugging the ground like it owed him something. The spring winds pushed against the cub's patched wings, but she held firm. Every rattle, every squeal of the engine felt like a memory trying to escape. He found the train at sunset. It was armored, yes, but not fast, crawling along the rails like it knew death was following behind. Tank cars, ammo crates, troop wagons, a mobile war machine heading east to try and buy the Germans more time. He radioed his wingman. "Thunder 1 to Thunder 2, confirm visual?" "Confirmed. Target in sight. Orders?" Skip looked at the rocket switch. "Just 4 this time. 4 rockets. 1 chance. Fire all. Break hard. Don't look back." He dove first. The cub screamed in protest as he nosed toward the train. The first rocket hit the fuel car. Flames shot skyward, lighting up the pass like a flare. The second slammed into the rear engine, throwing steel and steam into the air. His wingman's rockets followed. 2 direct hits. The ammo car erupted in a chain reaction, so violent it ripped half the train apart. The cub caught the shockwave like a slap. Skip barely kept it in the air. He didn't cheer, didn't smile. Just pulled back on the stick and let the plane carry him west. Smoke trailing behind, one hand pressed to his ribs as the sky turned red. He never saw the train again. And for the first time, he didn't need to. By the time Skip landed, it was nearly dark. The airfield was quiet, too quiet. No engines revving, no rushed orders, no ambulance trucks waiting near the edge of the runway. Just a single spotlight casting a dull yellow glow on the tarmac as his battered cub touched down with a wheeze and a wobble. As the plane rolled to a stop, the propeller coughing its last breath, Skip slumped forward, hand still clutching the stick. His body was done. Not tired, done. Every part of him ached like it belonged to someone else. His shoulder wound had reopened mid-flight. Blood soaked through his shirt. He didn't even notice until he felt the cold. A jeep pulled up before he could even climb out. Same black coats, same two agents. They didn't speak at first. They just looked at him. "You made it back," one of them said, like he'd bet against it. Skip grinned weakly. "You sound disappointed." They helped him down from the cockpit. His boots hit the ground and his knees buckled. He nearly dropped, but they caught him, awkwardly, like they weren't used to helping anyone without a rank or purpose. He brushed them off once he found his footing. "I assume the train's gone," the taller one said, lighting a cigarette. Skip didn't answer, just looked back at the Cub, now smoking from the engine, its wings torn like paper in the wind. "That was the last one," he said finally. The shorter agent frowned. "Last what?" "Last run. Last convoy, last kill. I've done all the flying I've got in me." He didn't say it with regret. There was no sadness in his voice, just clarity, like a man finally laying down a weapon he'd held for too long. The agents didn't argue. An ambulance rolled up minutes later. The nurse who stepped out gave him a look like she'd been expecting him hours ago. She handed him a blanket, fussed with his bandages, and whispered something soft about permanent nerve damage. He didn't respond. His ears were still ringing from the explosion. As they loaded him in the back, the taller agent stepped forward one last time. "You should know," he said. "They're naming a new aircraft after this." Skip raised an eyebrow. "It's based on your modifications. Light frame, high maneuverability, modular rocket pods. Prototypes already being tested. They're calling it the Thompson Scout." Skip barked out a short laugh, but it came out as a cough. "They're naming a plane after a recon pilot who broke every rule in the book." "They're rewriting the book," the agent said. "Because of you." He didn't know what to say to that. So he just nodded. The ambulance drove him away from the field, the Cub growing smaller in the rear window. It looked like a skeleton of a bird, wings cracked, paint burned, a machine that had done far more than it was ever built to do. And now, finally, it could rest. So could he. 3 weeks later, Skip was sitting in a wheelchair on the deck of a transport ship headed for England. A cane rested beside him, along with a thick file folder full of citations, letters, and one neatly typed commendation from General Eisenhower himself. He hadn't read any of them. The sun was warm, the sea calm, and for the first time in years no one was shooting at him. No tanks, no flag, no rocket switches under his fingers. An airman walked by with a newspaper in hand. Skip caught a glimpse of the headline, "Recon pilot credited with dozens of tank kills. New doctrine changes air strategy." His face was right under it. Not smiling, not posing, just staring out from the cockpit, blood on his brow, a 1,000-yard look in his eyes. The photo had been taken after his last mission, probably by that damn photographer who never spoke a word.
"Hey, that's you,"
the airman said. "You're famous." Skip looked at the picture, then back at the sea. "Yeah," he said. "Then why does it feel like I left all of me back there?" The kid didn't know how to answer. He nodded awkwardly and walked on. Skip sat in silence. He didn't want a parade, didn't want a medal. What he wanted, what he'd always wanted, was simple. For the men on the ground to live. For the tanks to burn before they reached his friends. For the fight to end sooner than it had to. And if strapping bazookas to a paper plane made that happen, then so be it. They could name all the doctrines they wanted. He'd done his part, and he was finally going home.